original plans now on display in the British Admiralty Museum, MGM commissioned the construction of a new bounty. First to star in an unforgettable motion picture, and now a star attraction at the New York World's Fair. In Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, the Bounty was the first three-masted sailing vessel to be launched since the 1880s. So rare have become the skills needed for such a job, it is probable that the Bounty will be the last wooden ship of its kind to be built anywhere in the world. During Bounty's construction, more than 400,000 board feet of lumber were shaped, 10,000 square yards of canvas sails were sewn, and 10 miles of rope were rigged, entirely by hand. From the top of its 100-foot mainmast to the cannons on deck to Captain Bly's cabin below, the new Bounty is a faithful copy of the original. These are actual shots of the Bounty's 7,300-mile maiden voyage from Nova Scotia to Tahiti. There, with such famous stars as Marlon Brando and Trevor Howard, it helped to reenact the most famous rebellion in the history of the sea, the mutiny on the Bounty. These scenes from MGM's epic motion picture show the Bounty's famous journey from Portsmouth, England to Tahiti in 1788. The ship's mission: to transplant Polynesian breadfruit to Jamaica, where it might provide an inexpensive food for slaves on English plantations. To please the Admiralty in his first command, Captain Bly tried to reach Tahiti by the shortest possible route, around Cape Horn. Only once in history had a ship taken this route in the dead of winter and survived. Near the Cape, Bly and his ship met head-on with combers almost as high as the Bounty itself. After weeks of struggle, the Bounty was turned back by a stubborn winter sea, and 5 months of sailing time were lost. Sailing back across the Atlantic and past Africa's Cape of Good Hope, the Bounty finally arrived in Tahiti on October 27, 1788. Bly and his men discovered an island paradise of palm trees, tropical wilderness, and handsome brown-skinned natives who welcomed their visitors with enthusiasm. This scene for Mutiny on the Bounty was filmed in the exact spot where the original Bounty dropped anchor 175 years ago. More than 6,000 natives and their canoes joined the Hollywood actors for the sequence. Most historians agree that native Tahitian charms helped to spark the revolt against Bly. As a matter of fact, the idea of mutiny was alive in the minds of many crew members long before the Bounty left Tahiti. In this spectacular scene from the film, 4 deserters attempt an escape to another island. The magnificent proa, or native outrigger, used in this sequence is also on display at the Bounty exhibit at the World's Fair Marina. Finally, with 1,000 breadfruit trees carefully planted in wooden tubs, Bly set sail for Jamaica, a port he was never destined to reach. During the past 2 years, the new Bounty has sailed to ports from Nova Scotia to Tahiti, to Honolulu, to Los Angeles, to Vancouver, to London, and back to the United States. Literally millions throughout the world have viewed the decks of this armed merchant ship of the past. In England alone, almost 1 million people watched as the Bounty sailed up the Thames to London. But now, visitors to the World's Fair Marina may explore Bounty below decks as well as above. This, then, is the story behind the exciting display at the World's Fair Marina. The Bounty, 118 feet long, above and below decks, an exact replica of the original. The beautiful proa, the outrigger canoe seen in Mutiny on the Bounty, Captain Bligh's incredible longboat, in which he and 18 others were cast adrift by Fletcher Christian and the mutineers, and finally, the authentic Polynesian village, complete with tiki poles shipped from Tahiti. Visitors to the Bounty at the World's Fair Marina may go aboard the vessel to see where Marlon Brando, Trevor Howard, and Richard Harris reenacted the famous mutiny. And for the first time, they may go below decks to view galleys, cabins, bunk rooms, antique ship's furnishings, and even a replica of the brig where errant crew members were punished. To visit the Bounty, simply leave the fairgrounds at Gate 2. A short walk or bus ride past the new Mets ballpark will bring you to the World's Fair Marina. Take buses marked to the marina. Anyone leaving the fairgrounds to visit the Bounty may re-enter without charge. You too will want to see where history was reenacted for a famous motion picture, to ponder why Fletcher Christian mutinied, and to admire the beauty of an 18th century sailing ship.
This is the ship Bounty, as she sailed peacefully off the volcanic islands in the South Pacific Ocean. The historic event has set fire to the imaginations of millions and inspired their spirit of adventure for more than 170 years. The mutiny against Captain William Bligh, led by an Englishman named Fletcher Christian, would probably have never been discovered had not another ship, the Topaz, put into Pitcairn Island for water in 1808. It was then the world learned the fate of the Bounty and her crew, a story which has been the basis of innumerable tales over the years. The latest chapter in the continuing story of the Bounty is remarkable indeed, and of particular significance to the Bay Area and Florida as a whole. For today, the Bounty has become St. Petersburg's newest tourist attraction, an exhibit expected to catch the eyes of untold thousands of visitors to the Sunshine City. How did this colorful whisper of memory come to be the focal point of interest in the space age? And how did she come to rest at St. Petersburg's Vinoy Yacht Basin? Therein hangs our tale, a sea story of modern-day sailing in a vessel from an earlier day, the Bounty. This, then, is a story of the Bounty's voyage from Oyster Bay, New York, to St. Petersburg.
Since Robin's been my rule, I am not going no more a-roving with you, fair maid. A-roving, since Robin's been my rule, I am not going no more a-roving with you, fair maid.
In 1960, Metro Goldwyn Mayer sought to retell the epic story of the mutiny on the Bounty, and set about to do just that by having a full-size replica of the Bounty built, from plans in the archives of the British Admiralty at a cost of some $750,000. Building the Bounty was not an easy task. Fur from Canada, oak from New Jersey were brought by the truckloads into the shipyard at Lunenburg, Nova Scotia to supply the more than 400,000 board feet to plank the Bounty's decks and form her masts. The mainmast alone would be a single timber that, when combined with two other sections, would rise 103 feet above the Bounty's deck. Veteran builders, working a double shift to keep up with the tight production schedule, sharpened their skills to put together a sailing ship by methods that had all but been forgotten in this modern world. Meanwhile, riggers labored on the more than 10 miles of line and halyards needed to trim the Bounty under sail, to brace her yards, bunt up her squaresels, and set her jib. A short distance away from where the Bounty was being built, a 73-year-old sailmaker and one assistant worked with palm and needle to fashion the 10,000 square feet of canvas for the Bounty's sails. 7 months after the Bounty's keel was wedged into position, she was christened in the traditional manner. But the bottle that crashed against her bow was filled not with champagne, but with water flown directly from Tahiti. Since that warm, sunny day at Lunenburg, the Bounty has sailed more than 100,000 miles visiting ports throughout the world. More recently, she was berthed at the New York World's Fair. Later, moved to Jacobson Shipyard at Oyster Bay, Long Island. But she was not destined to remain there long, for in the winter of 1964, negotiations between MGM and the city of St. Petersburg were begun with the objective to make St. Petersburg the new permanent home of this famed vessel. MGM had noted long before that its proud ship, as well as having phenomenal public appeal, commanded a nostalgic hearkening to the vanished era. It was apparent that whatever her future might be, the Bounty should be available to a vast, admiring public. So it was that on a cool, gray June morning, a hand-picked crew of 20 men, including a Bay Area newspaper man and Channel 8 cameraman Don Starr, the only professional television news cameraman on board, cast off from Oyster Bay to bring the 480-ton ship to her new home in Florida. Only a handful of friends and relatives of the volunteer crew turned out to bid the ship and her crew a bon voyage. The responsibility of delivering the Bounty and her crew to St. Petersburg, 1,571 miles away, rested squarely upon the young but capable shoulders of Captain Ross McKay, a 33-year-old master who during the Bounty's 7,000-mile voyage to Tahiti served as first mate. Since then, he's been master of his own freighter working a worldwide route. A short time ago, McKay became a hydrographer for the Canadian government, and MGM arranged with officials for McKay's leave from his post to bring the Bounty to Florida. Assisting as first mate was Julian Roosevelt, great-grandson of the great President Theodore Roosevelt and chairman of the America's Cup Racing Committee. The remainder of the volunteer crew, selected from scores of hopeful applicants by MGM's Director of Research, Ron Carroll, reflected a wide variety of backgrounds in professional and non-professional fields, but all having one common and serious interest: sailing ships. The Bounty's bosun, a bearded Nova Scotian named Hugh Boyd, has been a permanent crewman of the Bounty since she was launched in Lunenburg and has stood watch on the deck during every voyage the ship has made. With her 18 sails flued up, the Bounty maneuvered the narrows of a river, under a dozen bridges, through Hell's Gate, and along Manhattan Island, under power of her 2 diesel engines. Anxious sailors scrambled aloft to the main and fore at the gallant yards and out on the bowsprit for a better view of the memorable skyline and to return the waves and calls of good luck from the apartment dwellers, leaning precariously from their windows and lunching New Yorkers dining and lining the sidewalks of the East River Drive. Tugboats, pushing barges, passing freighters and ferry boats all saluted the Bounty with shrill blasts of their sirens. The Bounty modestly acknowledged each in turn with 3 timid toots from a rather weary foghorn perched high on the mizzenmast. Trailing her wake through the murky East River, the Bounty guided past the United Nations building, the Brooklyn Navy Yard, then turned slightly to round the tip of Manhattan and past the Statue of Liberty. Late that first afternoon, in lower New York Bay, a few miles from the Jersey coast near Sandy Hook, the pilot left the Bounty. A short time later, with Ambrose lightship in view, a dreaded call was heard throughout the ship. Fire! A thin wisp of blue smoke trailed from the hatchway of the great cabin as Captain McKay brought the engines to all stop. Fire hoses were strung out on deck as crewmen chopped through planking to find the source of the blaze. A stream of water was played on the smoking side of the ship as crewmen located the trouble. A faulty valve in the exhaust cooling system permitted a heat build up to a point where wooden planking began to smolder and burn. During the emergency, the graceful Queen Mary, pride of the Cunard Line, passed less than a mile away bound for England, her decks lined with hundreds of passengers. Captain McKay assessed the damage from the fire, entered it in the ship's log, and passed the order to resume course and speed toward the open sea. The original Bounty, a coastal trader named Bethia, was selected by the Navy of King George III over 5 other vessels as being better suited for Captain Bligh's mission to the South Seas. She was refitted at the Deptford shipyard on the 10th, armed with 4 4-pounder cannon and 10 half-pound swivel guns, and rechristened the Bounty. Bligh was well pleased with his ship and once wrote a friend that, and we quote, "I have the happiness to tell you that my little ship does wonderfully well. I have her now the completest ship that ever swam, and she really looks one fit to encounter difficulties and is looked as such knowing our voyage." It's quite probable that Bligh would be equally pleased with his ship's twin sister. Under Bligh's command, she time and again matched weather's worst. North Atlantic gales, a tropical hurricane, Caribbean waterspouts, and the ill-tempered heavings of the ocean misnamed Pacific. The likes of the new Bounty may never be seen again. As one veteran shipwright put it, there'll be no more like the Bounty. She's not just a copy of the famous old vessel. She was built with the old skills, and in another 10 years, there won't be many of us left to remember how she should go. She's a fine ship, sort of a beautiful freak. With the events of the first major emergency behind the Bounty, and with still 2 more fires to break out beneath her wooden deck, the crew settled down to begin to learn what sailing a square rigger on the high seas was really like. Unfortunately, eager sailors were denied the chance to unfurl the great canvas sails as the Bounty plowed through the rich blue Atlantic Ocean. Steadily increasing winds from the south-southeast caught the Bounty head-on. More favorable wind was predicted, but never came. Still, there was much work to be done, refinishing cannon, whipping ends to be tended, standing watch at the helm, and a multitude of chores which seemed never to diminish. As the ship's work mounted, so did the weather. Casual flecks of white foam crested the tops of Atlantic swells, which seemed to grow taller each passing hour. A brisk southerly wind whistled softly through the rigging, and the Bounty took on a pronounced pitching movement, which made walking the deck both an uphill climb and a downhill run each time the bow dipped into a wave.
A-rovin', since roving's been my rule, I am now go no more a-rovin' with you, fair maid. In Amsterdam there lived a maid, mark well what I do say. In Amsterdam there lived a maid, and she was mistress of her trade. I'll go no more a-rovin' with you, fair maid. A-rovin', since roving's been my rule, I am now go no more a-rovin' with you, fair maid. Her eyes is like the stars so bright, mark well what I do say. Her eyes is like the stars so bright, her face is fair, her step is light. I'll go no more a-rovin' with you, fair maid. A-rovin', since roving's been my rule, I am now go no more a-rovin' with you, fair maid. Her cheeks are like the rosebud red, mark well what I do say. Her cheeks are like the rosebud red, there's wealth of hair upon her head. I'll go no more a-rovin' with you, fair maid. A-rovin', since roving's been my rule, I am now go no more a-rovin'
watery valleys were dug with each cresting swell whose force and height the Bounty found insurmountable, and she would fall off the laboring uphill climb and lie dead in the water. The engine strained to regain the ship's forward motion, but again, wind-whipped seas wrenched her timbers, and the Bounty's constant groan became a familiar sound to the crewman's ears. Working aloft to the Bounty's rigging, when seas are running high and the wind begins to scream through lines and weather stays, is a dangerous assignment and not one for the faint at heart. Nimble-footed sailors scurried up footlines to the uppermost portion of the ship's masts, the main royal, 100 feet above the deck. Tightening weather stays, weakened by the strain of the sea and wind, meant that sailors would have to hang over the gunwale to make the required repairs as foam-capped waves lapped at their heels. Other tedious work for men with steady hands and the sure-footedness of a mountain goat was needed often during the course of the journey. Difficult, too, was the work of the galley crew, headed by Chef Mike Pappas. In fair weather and foul, the chore of preparing 3 meals a day for 20 hungry men seemed never-ending. Pappas toiled long hours in the cubicle which served as a galley and came up with a variety of dishes, usually topped off with his specialty, a Greek salad. The heat below deck averaged an uncomfortable 110 degrees. This, coupled with the heat of stove and oven in the galley, made Pappas's job most unenviable to the entire crew. Life aboard the Bounty at sea was not all work and no play. There were brief periods in the evening when weather permitting. The crew not on watch could rest, read, or sleep. Some of the more talented hands, such as Boatswain Hugh Boyd, entertained with music. Others, like Paul Mitchell, applied their talents in another direction. At one point in the voyage, Captain McKay inspected a sealed jar containing a note from Channel 8 television stating the finder would be sent $50. The jar was tossed over the side more than 100 miles off the coast of the United States. The exact position is entered in the ship's official log. As the Bounty progressed southward, the weather showed signs of improving. The sun seemed brighter and warmer to the crew, and daytime watchstanders began to look for places to sleep on deck to escape the heat below. After a brief stopover at Fort Lauderdale for crew rest and recreation, the Bounty got underway and resumed her journey toward the Florida Straits. But 5 miles off the coast of Miami Beach, the ship hove to when 2 small boats approached. One contained a camera crew, the other the stars of NBC's Flipper series. The Bounty and her crew spent most of the day participating in filming a segment of an upcoming episode entitled Flipper and the Bounty, which will be telecast in the fall. With scarcels limply hanging from the yards and the crew crouched down beneath the gunwales to be out of camera range, the Bounty drifted northward as scenes were shot and reshot. Late that afternoon, the Bounty again headed southward past Miami Beach and the Florida Keys. Passage through the Florida Straits was uneventful. The sea was calm, the sky clear, but the Bounty was still plagued by adverse wind. Under partial sail, the Bounty slipped quietly westward through the emerald green waters of the Gulf, past American and Pelican Shoals, the Marquesas Island, and toward dry Tortugas. Here the Bounty was in an element almost entirely her own, a vastly rich area steeped in tales of buried treasure from merchant ships 200 years earlier, whose skeletons bear the scars of a fatal broadside from a pirate ship's guns. Legend has it that such infamous buccaneers as Jean Lafitte, Jose Gaspar, and Blackbeard stalked the waters near Tortugas for wealthy cargo ships. The Bounty would have been a fancy prize for any pirate in those days, and now as she sailed toward a flaming Gulf sunset, there was nothing to dispel the illusion that somewhere in the shadows of her shrouds, a young naval commander paced the deck, his mind beset with a long voyage ahead and the mutinous rabble he had for a crew. The Bounty's entrance into the main ship channel leading to her St. Petersburg berthing place was not unlike the original Bounty's arrival at Tahiti, Matavai Bay, 170 years ago. Captain Bligh's log held a brief description of the scene. As we drew near, he wrote, a great number of canoes came off to us. They crowded on board in vast numbers, and in 10 minutes, the deck was so full I could scarcely find my own people. Several hundred small boats, some of them gaily decorated in a Polynesian theme, cruised alongside as the Bounty moved up the channel and under the Skyway Bridge. This time, her pilot was a man well known to St. Petersburg residents, a former steamship captain and one-time mayor of St. Petersburg, Captain Edward Brantley. Grass-skirted girls waved from small boats as the ship moved closer to the Sunshine City. Visitors on board, numbering about 50 persons, were picked up near Mullet Key as special guests of MGM and the Bounty's crew, and put off again at the city's municipal pier. Several thousand persons were on hand to greet the ship as she negotiated a tricky, narrow channel entrance to the Vinoy Yacht Basin, a colorful waterfront home for the new Bounty. As mooring lines were made fast and the crew made ready to leave the ship for the last time, native girls, dressed in colorful grass skirts and sarongs, bordered with armloads of flower leis, and happily embraced the crew. The similar scene is recounted in Bligh's logbook when he anchored at Tahiti. Families and friends of the crew were allowed to visit the ship while customs officials and the captain officially signed off the sailors as members of the Bounty's last crew and paid them each $1. The final chapter of the Bounty may not be written here. One day, she may again sniff the sea winds and bury her bow in a frothy swell in some ocean somewhere. But one thing certain, she is the last of her kind. There will be no more like her put to sea.
Majesty's ship Bounty, Queen of the Seven Seas.
Newspaper headlines, radio and television reports. They are proving she is the most famous ship in the world today as she begins a fabulous voyage to faraway places. In Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada's great metropolis of the Pacific Northwest, her trip begins. An air of excitement grips the city. As the word spreads, the Bounty is coming. Outside the harbor, the noise is deafening. Whistles, horns, and bells sound a welcome as more than 400 small craft form an escort for the triumphal entry into historic Burrard Inlet. People, police estimate more than 350,000 of them, line every shore surrounding the harbor to shout their own greetings as the ship passes majestically under the great Lions Gate Bridge. This colorful ship has captured the imagination of the adventurous and the romantic ever since she was built in Lunenburg, Nova Scotia by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer expressly for mutiny on the Bounty. As fireboats and yachts accompany her to the inner harbor, the Bounty edges into a dock in the heart of the city where Royal Canadian Navy bands, Scottish pipers, government officials, and thousands of other well-wishers are awaiting her. The red carpet of welcome is laid down. Civic leaders step aboard to receive three-cornered hats and scrolls that pronounce them honorary members of the Bounty crew. Docked alongside one of the main streets of Vancouver, the ship proves an irresistible magnet for visitors. During her 3-day stay in the city, more than 75,000 persons, 31,000 in one day alone, step aboard to get a close view of the decks on which Marlon Brando, Trevor Howard, and the other performers so recently enacted the historic story of Fletcher Christian, Captain Bligh, and the most famous mutiny in the history of the sea. As the leading newspaper headlined it, HMS Bounty is here, and the city surrenders willingly. Next port of call, Victoria, where another thrilling reception awaits her. The people of this capital city of British Columbia are ready and anxious to live up to their reputation for old-fashioned hospitality. After passing the overnight steamer from Seattle, the Bounty edges into the pier, which has been especially built for her, in front of the government's impressive Parliament building and the famous Empress Hotel. Premier Bennett, head of the government, is on hand to receive a tri-cornered hat and to learn about the ship from Captain Ellsworth Coggins, who has commanded her since she was built. During 2 days in Victoria, 28,000 persons go aboard the ship, some having traveled many miles from remote areas of the province, coming to the city in buses chartered especially for the big event. Premier Bennett requested that the vessel make a return visit after completion of her world tour, and the entire city of Victoria happily seconded the invitation. And so to Seattle, to join the famed Space Needle as a part of the Great World's Fair. Passengers aboard the fair's Century 21 ferryboat are fortunate. They have a close view of the Bounty as she enters the harbor and is greeted by Coast Guard vessels, fireboats, and other small craft. After providing a spectacular panorama against the city's skyline, the ship approaches the popular Polynesian Pier, where crowds have been waiting for hours. So many people that even the police find it almost impossible to estimate the number. They are there with confetti and horns and happy smiles, all part of the gay carnival atmosphere of the fair. For For Captain Coggins, official greetings from John Sherberg, Lieutenant Governor of the state of Washington. Then a welcome from Joseph Gandy, President of the World's Fair. For almost a week, the Bounty would remain in Seattle, a magnet for the hundreds of thousands flocking to the city to attend the fair. And now, San Francisco. Her sails unfurled, the Bounty moves under the Golden Gate Bridge and provides one of the most beautiful sights this greatest of all natural harbors has ever seen. From the shores, the people of San Francisco, alerted to her arrival by newspapers, radio, and television, see her move gracefully past famous landmarks. A never-to-be-forgotten sight, and one probably never to be repeated. A sight that is fast becoming familiar to the Bounty and her crew. Well-wishers waiting to greet her and them. There are people and more people. San Francisco's popular mayor, George Christopher, becomes an honorary Bounty officer as visitors crowd onto the deck of the famous ship. Before she would leave the Golden Gate City, the Bounty would be visited by more than 200,000 persons. For 4 days, they swarmed over the ship, all of them young in spirit, and some young in years. No part of the ship escaped their inspection or their cameras. And following her visit, once more this great ship moves into the Pacific to continue her voyage to other cities, calling attention everywhere to mutiny on the Bounty.
The date is April 28, 1789. His Majesty's ship Bounty is the scene of a mutiny that will become one of the most dramatic stories of the sea. Angered by Captain William Bligh's harsh treatment of his men, Master's Mate Fletcher Christian leads the crew in a mutiny and seizes control of the ship. After Bligh and 18 loyal seamen are set adrift in a small boat, Christian sails the Bounty to Tahiti and then to Pitcairn Island, where the famous ship is burned and sunk. Remains of the original Bounty can still be seen today beneath the clear ocean waters off Pitcairn. But now, a new Bounty sails the seas, built by MGM expressly for the spectacular Mutiny on the Bounty. This is the first ship ever to be constructed from the keel up for a motion picture. The movie makers went to Lunenburg, near Halifax in Nova Scotia, to build their ship. Here, among the 3,000 residents of this small fishing village, lived the only craftsman who could build a new Bounty in the manner of the 18th century. But why build a completely new ship? James Havens, who supervised her building and directed the film's exciting sea sequences, explains.
In years gone by, the various studios have been able to find wooden hulls that have been suitable for revamping purposes, for making period ships. But with the lack of wooden shipbuilding that we've had in the last decade or more, the wooden hulls are no longer available. And for that reason, it was decided to start from scratch, design a ship, and have it built by a proper wood shipbuilding firm. Research material came from the Admiralty in London, the original drafts of the Bounty, which were made in 1787, and all other sources of available research material were gleaned to get this ship as authentic as possible.
After a worldwide search, MGM commissioned the firm of Smith & Rewland to recreate the Bounty. With adze and chisel and broadaxe, the Lunenburg craftsmen began the exacting job of fashioning ribs for the ship's hull. The keel was laid on March 3rd in the boat shed that would be Bounty's home until her launching. 400,000 board feet of timber, half of it American oak from New Jersey, would have to be worked by hand. The hull would be 118 feet long and 30 1/2 feet in the beam. She was to displace almost 500 tons, and her masts would reach over 100 feet above the deck. Below decks, there would be accommodations for a crew of 30. Among other nautical items, 12 tons of screw bolts, 14 tons of bar iron, 2 1/2 tons of spikes, and 1,200 pounds of putty would soon go into the ship. The transom and the first of her ribs are soon fitted, and with each passing day, more of the ship's skeleton takes form. While work goes on in the shipyard, other artisans in the town are making their contributions. At Vernon Walters' marine blacksmith shop, where 3 generations of the family have been outfitting sailing vessels, forge and hammer shape the ironwork. An eye bolt to hold the rudder chain, 1 1/2 inch of steel, shaped and forge welded in the time-tested manner. Modern technology has yet to find any process which can produce a stronger weld than this combination of heat, hammer, and muscle. In the hands of a Lunenburg shipwright, the adze becomes a precision instrument. Its edge is sharp enough for shaving, and when an experienced eye directs the stroke, 15 pieces of American oak can be shaped into one solid block, soon to form the stem post, the bow of the ship. When bolted together, they form a mass weighing over 4 tons, the heaviest single component to go into the hull. Then comes the problem of moving it into position, and there is no other way to do the job than by hand. With pulley and chain, the men move the huge piece through the doors of the shed and hoist it into position on the keel. The fit is perfect. With installation of the stem post, a major task has been completed. The remaining ribs can now be moved into position and the framing finished. As the tempo of work increases, other firms in Lunenburg are putting the finishing touches on the 1,001 articles needed for the ship. Bounty's rigging requires more than 300 blocks and almost 200 deadeyes. And at Dauphinet's block shop, Harry Beck turns them out. On the lathe, he fashions a deadeye from a block of lignum vitae, one of the hardest and heaviest of woods. This tropical timber was growing on a Caribbean island before the original Bounty set sail on her fateful voyage. Lignum vitae in Latin translation means tree of life. Not so long ago, people boiled these chips and shavings and sold the broth as a remedy for rheumatism. This operation is known as serving spun yarn. Tarred yarn is tightly wound to wire rope to protect it from the corrosive effects of salt spray. Wire provides added strength without stretching, and nearly 2 miles are used in the rigging. 200 years ago, Manila rope was used. So for authenticity, the wire is hidden with strands of Manila. As each strand is wrapped, it is seized to a deadeye with cord and marlinspike. Every piece of rigging is cut, wrapped, and spliced while the hull of the vessel is being assembled. In the boat shed, Bounty's frame rapidly takes shape. Several ribs go into position each day. Cut, shaped, and assembled outside the boat shed, they are brought inside for installation. With block and tackle, each rib is hoisted, lowered into position, and bolted to the keel. In every case, the adzemen have done their work well. The ribs have been shaped true to the last degree. But a hull is only part of a sailing ship. In their sail loft, two old-timers are fashioning the 10,000 square yards of canvas that will form Bounty's sails. Every foot must be cut and sewn by hand. A 6-month job. As Charlie Hebb tells it, he learned his trade when making sails was a promising profession.
Well, I started sail making with my father. That's 50-odd years ago. And at them times, there was all for our fishing schooners, fore and afters. Large mainsails, very large foresails, the other sails according. Everything was done by hand at them times. Since the vessels have gone out, well, sail making has gone out also. Although we did make some large suits, some large sails, 10 or 12 years ago. I don't know exactly what year it was. We made 2 suits for the Argentine Calcalas. But her sails was a lot larger than what they are for the Bounty. The Bounty has 21 sails onto them. The duck is not so heavy, but very heavy rope put onto it. And everything on the machine outside the rope.
Titus Trailers, visita mi canal.
In Nova Scotia, they've learned that modern techniques can be combined with old-fashioned ways for best results. Thus, a pneumatic drill replaces the auger, but truntles or wooden nails are still superior to steel bolts when you want the tightest possible seal on a ship's exterior planking. Over 15,000 truntles were sledgehammered into Bounty's hull. For months, work moved ahead rapidly, and finally the beautiful ship is ready for launching. She so completely filled the shed that one end had to be knocked out to allow her to slide into the water. On August 27th, thousands of visitors swarmed into Lunenburg for the big event. Canada's Rear Admiral Hugh Francis Pullen begins the ceremony.
Today we go back 200 years to see an 18th century ship launched, and in due course rigged and ready for sea. All this is made possible by the skill and craftsmanship of many Lunenburgers. Truly a wonderful achievement. As a seaman, I wish this Bounty good success, and may she have fair winds at all her voyaging.
Go forth, O blessed ship, and may harmony, peace, and goodwill prevail in thee, and the blessing of God go with thee, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
A few tense moments while workmen swarm underneath the ship to drive in the wedges and grease the skids, enabling Bounty to slide down the ways. And then, the climax of 6 months' work. Mrs. Fred Ruland christens the ship, using a bottle of water specially flown from Tahiti.
I christened this ship the Bounty.
One push, and HMS Bounty slides down the ways. Good reason to cheer, for the Bounty was the first 3-masted sailing vessel to be launched in Lunenburg since the 1880s. And in his own way, each of the town's residents had helped in her construction. Yet the job is only half completed. True, the vessel had tasted salt water, but she is still merely a hull. Graceful, to be sure, but lacking the masts, the yards, and the sails that will give her purpose and beauty. For this phase of construction, Bounty is brought alongside the wharf and the rigging crew takes over. First aboard is the mainmast, a 50-foot-long piece of Douglas fir. Above this will go the topmast and the topgallant until they reach 100 feet above the deck. The three masts had to be fashioned with a skillfully aimed broadaxe, for no perfect wooden mast can be built by machine. There's a sailor's superstition that a silver dollar under the mast will bring good fortune to a ship and all who sail her. The men building the Bounty are taking no chances. As each mast is lowered into position, dead eyes are attached. A sailing vessel's rigging must be tuned as carefully as a fine violin. With canvas aloft, there will be great strain on mast and rigging, and these lashings must have just the proper amount of tension. George Snow, experienced rigger, and now the Bounty's boatswain, ties down the ratlins, or rope ladders, which provide the seamen with a pathway aloft to yard and sail. For others in the crew, this is their first attempt at rigging a vessel of this type. The most complicated job they've ever tackled. With spars in place, the ship is moved to the boatyard for the rest of the rigging. By now, the sailing crew is being assembled, and they join the riggers on the yards to learn the secrets of block and tackle, clowland and gasket, shoot and sail. On the bowsprit and jib boom, 40 feet out from the stem, they rigged the widow catcher and the martingale. As for the apprentice crew members, they literally learned the ropes. Any false step might mean injury or death. Yet more than 300 Nova Scotians applied for a berth on the Bounty. One of the lucky new seamen is young Hugh Boyd.
The first few times in the yards were kind of shaky. I found myself holding on pretty tight. But after a few times up, well, it seemed to get a little better, and now we can work up there without too much trouble. Maybe a little different at sea. That'll remain to be seen. I signed on the Bounty mainly to get the adventure. It seems like a wonderful opportunity to get into the South Seas, which must be everybody's dream at one time or another.
And now, after almost 200 years, HMS Bounty is ready to sail again. For almost a year, the efforts of hundreds of men and women have been directed toward the day Bounty will first carry canvas. And in mid-October, the long-awaited day arrives. Moving smoothly out of Lunenburg Harbor, the ship slides by the breakwater into the open sea. For the first time, the crew is aloft to work sail, a chore that will be repeated many times. Heeling gently into the Atlantic swell, responding gracefully to the force of wind on canvas, HMS Bounty is underway. The people of Lunenburg have done their work well. From jib to spanker, the sails catch the breeze. With several trial runs behind her, the Bounty set her course for the Panama Canal, the South Pacific, and Tahiti. Ellsworth Coggins, retired Canadian Navy commander and now the Bounty's captain, describes her voyage.
We left Lunenburg on the morning of October the 26th, and after clearing the harbor, set our course for Moni Passage, passing to the eastward of the Bermuda Islands, and then carried on through the Moni Passage down to Panama, sailing along as the weather and winds and seas permitting. The passage down from Lunenburg to Panama took 12 and a half days, and average weather was experienced on the way going down. A few rough days and mostly fine weather. The first few days out was spent considerably by the crew and breaking them into sail drill continuously, night and day, setting sail, reefing sail, and setting sails again.
Once in the Pacific, fair weather and favorable winds carried the vessel along at better than 10 knots. Then, one December day, the island known as the most beautiful in the world looms above the horizon. The Bounty had made the 7,327-mile voyage from Lunenburg to Tahiti in 33 sailing days. And now, the fabled tropical island was but a few hours away. The Tahitians had prepared a welcome that the crew would never forget. As Captain Coggins recalls it,
we arrived in Tahiti on the morning of December the 4th, early in the morning, and laid off the island until approximately 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. Then we sailed into Matavai Bay and anchored in the exact anchorage that Bly anchored when he arrived at Tahiti.
Native dancers and drummers approached the Bounty in an ancient war canoe, rebuilt for mutiny on the Bounty. For generations, mariners have told of the friendly welcome they received in Tahiti, and the Bounty's crew soon learned that these tales were not exaggerated. First aboard is lovely Hinano. She delivers her own special greeting. First to Captain Coggins, then to the rest of the crew. A lei of tropical flowers for the captain. Jim Havens greets the film's producer, Aaron Rosenberg. English actor Trevor Howard, who portrays Captain Bly in the film. Mrs. James Norman Hall, widow of the author of Mutiny on the Bounty. Mr. Howard receives Hinano's welcome. Members of the crew are introduced to the tamare, the uninhibited dance of the island, while the movie makers learn details of the voyage. Some of the boys get personal instruction from Hinano, accepted rather reluctantly. Though they didn't know it, the men were learning the Tahitian version of the twist. After the welcome, the ship eases into the harbor of Papeete, Tahiti's only city, and home for half the island's 35,000 population. This will become a familiar sight to the crew, for the Bounty must return to this dock after every day's filming. Stepping on board for the first time is Marlon Brando, soon to begin his role as Fletcher Christian. If the hospitality of the natives is part of the magic of Tahiti, part also must lie in the breathtaking beauty of the island. The interior of the island is deserted, an almost trackless wilderness of peaks and valleys, gorges and plunging waterfalls. Perhaps these were the very scenes that inspired French explorer de Bougainville to exclaim, "I thought I was walking in a Garden of Eden." But for the crew of the Bounty, now most daylight hours and some evenings as well are spent performing the chores that are a seaman's lot. Each day that weather permits, the ship must leave Papeete and sail past the coral reef to the open sea. As seaman Jim Johnson describes it,
the daily routine aboard the Bounty starts at about 6 o'clock, and that is when the cooks get up to prepare breakfast for the crew. At 7 o'clock, we usually leave for the various locations around the island, and occasionally on one or two of the other outside islands that lie around Tahiti. Since most of the crew are in the movie, we have to get into uniform, and some who have shorter hair have to get put on wigs. Since most of us have long hair, which hasn't been cut since we left Nova Scotia, it looks pretty authentic.
by now the crew is experienced in the ways of the square-rigged sail, and the maze of rope and dizzying heights aloft are no longer an awesome mystery. As soon as the ship is out of camera range of the island, preparations for filming begin.
Members of the crew prepare to play their movie roles with Marlon Brando and the other professional actors. The costumes the men wore were as authentically and faithfully reproduced as the ship itself. The shipbuilders had planned well. By installing removable platforms, they made it possible for the camera to film difficult scenes from unusual angles. The heavy 70mm Ultra Panavision camera is secured in position. Assistant cameraman Conrad Hall, son of Bounty author James Norman Hall, holds the viewfinder. The sailors turned actor take positions on the taffrail, and at the director's call for action, climb the ratlins, while the camera records another scene for the spectacular film. Each sequence is filmed from several angles until the director is satisfied he has the shot he wants. A day spent in this sort of activity can weary the hardiest of young seamen. When the last scene of the day is finally on film, the actors become professional sailors again, as preparations are made for the trip back to Papeete. To Jim Johnson and the rest of the crew, this means one thing: shore leave.
Our day usually ends at about from 5 to 6 in the evening, and we do this 6 days a week, so we are all pretty anxious to see Saturday evening come, which is our mail day and payday, and we have Sunday off, which is a great help. So, and when we tie up in Tahiti, everybody is glad.
Like the hundreds of seamen before them, the Bounty's crew learned to like and respect the Tahitian natives. Their naturalness, generosity, and love of life have always impressed those lucky enough to visit this island paradise. No trip to the South Seas would be complete without taking part in a Polynesian tamara, an elaborate feast in the Tahitian manner. Food for the event must be prepared days in advance. Fish is cleaned and filleted for baking in ovens of volcanic stones, which are heated to redness. Young suckling pigs and bananas are packed into the oven, or umu, along with native vegetables. Breadfruit, a staple in the Polynesian diet, and the reason for the first Bounty trip to Tahiti, is always a part of any meal. After all ingredients have been packed into the umu, the container is covered with banana leaves, placed on heated stones, covered with earth, and left for several hours. When the umu is removed from the stones and the protective covering of leaves is peeled away, the aroma is enough to tempt even the most jaded of palates. Bananas, breadfruit, and pork have baked and steamed to perfection in their own natural juices. This method of cooking is traditional in Tahiti, especially for important occasions. And a visit from the men of the Bounty is just such an event. Fingers are the order of the day, and judging from the expressions on their faces, the Bounty seamen are well satisfied with the efforts of their Tahitian hosts. But food and drink are only a part of any successful tamara. To the rhythm of drums, voices, and guitars, the Bounty's men join in the tamaray, the national dance of Tahiti. It really doesn't matter how well you dance, as long as you try. Dancing is as natural to Tahitians as breathing, and it's a breach of etiquette if a visitor doesn't join in. Perhaps now we have an idea of the magic spell cast over every man who has visited Tahiti since the first explorers landed there in 1605. Why Fletcher Christian longed to return there after his mutiny, and why every member of the new Bounty's crew hopes he will return someday to this island paradise.